Meeting of December 19th, 2017. Welcome, everyone. Please rise for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sylvia, roll call, please.
Mayor Wazogel.
Here.
Council President Garland.
Here.
Councilor Young. Here. Councilor Kuiper.
Here.
Councilor Browse.
Here.
Councilor Griffin.
Here.
And Councilor Rosner.
Here.
Thank you.
I think you noticed that we have one city councilor who is here electronically, but he's alive and well and joins us in this evening's activities. We're about to approve the agenda. Is there a motion for such?
I move we approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Agenda is approved. Now we have the consent agenda for 4 items. Approval of the December 4th, 2017 City Council meeting minutes. The same for approval of December 5th, 2017 council meeting minutes. Approval of December 11, 2017 council meeting minutes. And the last part, approval of December 12, 2017 city council meeting attendance.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Consent agenda is hereby approved. Citizen comments. Sylvia, have we requests for that? The request is Patrick Dinan. Patrick?
Turn your mic on, make it green.
Green.
There you go.
My name is Patrick Dinan. I have been before you a number of times dealing with the municipal courts in Sherwood and the actions of your judge. Evidently, the mayor I talked to today told me that I am wasting your time, your energy, etc. And I feel the same way about you folks. You're not taking responsibility on the city charter, number 36, which is you're responsible for the court. The court is not a court of record, and therefore and you can ask your city attorney right here in front of everybody. He gave me a 4-page sheet saying what the municipal court of Sherwood could do, and for some reason, he didn't include traffic violations in that 4-page report. So I ask you today, would the city attorney tell you and we, the public, that the municipal court of Sherwood is in compliance with all state laws to hear traffic violations? Is that approvable? Can you handle that? Do you have the courage to ask him yes or no? Are we going to be dummies? Is it okay to ask him that? Yes or no? No wonder you've had so much problems. I request as a citizen, not of the city of Sherwood, but of the state of Oregon, because we participate in state law. You have to comply with the state law. Why wouldn't he answer that question? The other question is, I gave you a letter stating that your judge, Mr. Morse, not once, but a number of times when I was in front of him, violated the law. He turned around and he said he was a court of records based on Chapter 153, Not going to happen. He then denied me the legal rights of every citizen to bring proof before court to defend their position. He stated, and you had a number of city employees there to verify, and I can give you affidavits of individuals, that he stated that he would only accept licensed attorneys as experts. You can go to the Oregon Evidence Code or the ORCP, and he cannot support his claim. I asked him in court. I asked him in writing afterwards. He refused to respond. So he denied me the right of being able to defend myself, which is kind of, it has to be interpreted, but that's called coercion. Because the two people I had subpoenaed, one was an officer that gave me the ticket, 8 years of experience, and my friend who has got numerous years experience on motor vehicle laws and has testified in front of other courts. What I found today, you have done absolutely nothing to investigate that claim. I find that totally irresponsible, and I can understand where there is turmoil and why somebody got married and left town. I like to have answers. And all I get is, this is not city business. You're in violation of Chapter 36 of the city charter to be responsible to respond to questions like that. I can't go anywhere else. You're responsible for the hiring and firing of the judge. That individual right there has told me that he told you when I sent you a letter back in June not to reply. How do you think we feel? You're generating millions of dollars. You're getting an average of 720 tickets on your cameras coming down 99.
Your time is up, sir. Thank
Your
you.
time is up. Why don't you respond to we, the public? Well, we will see what we can do. You're in trouble now. Unbelievable.
The next citizen comment is from Diane Matthews.
Green light's on, right? Hi. I'm Diane Matthews, and I'm here just to talk to you a little bit about Sherwood West expansion, and I'm here to represent my sister and myself, Marlene Mandel. And I sent all of you a letter on December 4th, and I'll make this very quick, but I just want to make sure that you received the letter. I did hear from one council member that you did. And in that letter, what I'm requesting respectively is that our entire 57 acres be included in the expansion and not divide our property up. My sister and I both very much are in favor of the expansion and have worked for quite some time with the city. My sister's not here tonight because she works in the evening, so I'm here representing her also. So I just would really request that the entire 57 acres be brought in, not just 40 acres. And I understand, and I had a nice meeting with the planners, and it was an oversight, but I want to just ensure that that not be forgotten. So I would ask that any communication with regards to our property to Metro and stuff, if I could be included, because we definitely want to be part of the process and be included. We've been in this community for over 100 years, our family. And then the other piece is there are a number of Mandels. The piece of property, Mandel Farms, we're not part of that development at all. My sister and I own a totally separate piece of property. So just clarity to the commissioners on all that too. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Happy holidays.
Sylvia,
I have no others, Mayor.
no further citizen comments. We can go on to the next item, which are the public hearings. Item 7 on your agenda The single item A is ordinance 2017-008, approving the Sherwood High School concept plan, amendments to the comprehensive plan text, amendments to the comprehensive plan and zone map, and adoption of a Title 11 concept plan and establishing an effective date. Sylvia?
So Mayor and Council, prior to the staff report, I do have the public hearing statement to read. The Sherwood City Council will hold a public hearing on ordinance 2017-008, approving the Sherwood High School concept plan, amendments to the comprehensive plan text, amendments to the comprehensive plan and zone map, and adoption of a Title 11 concept plan and establishing an effective date. The public hearing this evening is now called to order. The public hearing this evening will be conducted as follows. Staff will present the staff report, questions by the hearing body of staff. You will then open the hearing for testimony, and the time will be limited as follows. The applicant will receive 30 minutes split between presentation and rebuttal. Persons in favor of the application, 4 minutes each. Persons opposed to the application, 4 minutes each. Rebuttal from the applicant should be the remainder of the 30 minutes. We will then close the public hearing. No further comments will be heard from the public or the applicant. Final comments from staff, questions of staff by the council, discussion by the council. This is the first hearing before the City Council on this application. Generally, the council will hold 2 hearings prior to making a decision. A second hearing on this application is currently scheduled. This time we don't have a date. However, in accordance with the city charter, the council reserves the right to make a decision at the close of this hearing by unanimous vote on all sitting council members. If you wish to speak, please fill out the testimony form and submit it to the city recorder. The mayor will recognize people wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed to the mayor. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and address for the record. In reaching a decision on the application, the council must consider whether the application meets the relevant approval criteria in the city's land use regulations and any other applicable law. Those criteria are identified in the staff report. The testimony and evidence must address these criteria or other criteria you believe to apply to the decision. Please note, failure to raise an issue with enough detail to enable the council, the applicant, and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Also, failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues regarding proposed conditions of approval with enough detail to allow the council to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. At this time, I would like to ask the members of the council to disclose any ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest. Please indicate the nature and extent of the ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate or abstain from this hearing. None?
Well, Sylvia, this is Tim. I just want to bring up one contact. This was prior to me being on the council. I did have a conversation with the former mayor, Keith Mays, about just general traffic safety issues around the intersection of 99 and Sunset. That was the only contact.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor, at this time, you can open the public hearing for the staff report.
Okay. The public hearing is now open. Sylvia, do you have?
No, we're ready for the staff report.
Please.
Thank you, Mayor. Fellow council members, Matt Street, presenting agenda item 7A for staff. The project before you today is case file PA 1702, an application that helps pave the way for the school, the new Sherwood High School. The application has 4 parts that we're going to go over in just a moment in a little bit more detail. The application site is located outside the city limits in an area that Metro calls an urban reserve. It's shown on the image to the right on your screen in front of you. The application area is inside a newly expanded urban growth boundary. More specifically, the site is bordered on the south by Kruger Road, the north by Hade Road, and the east by Elwert Road. The site consists of 4 parcels totaling 82 acres, 76.2 of which are private and 6.1 of which are right-of-way. As the site is currently outside the city limits, its unincorporated Washington County zoning designation is agriculture and forest 20-acre minimum. Now, this application and its place in the school's timeline can be a little bit confusing, so I wanted to take a moment tonight to walk the council through where this step is in the process and what the applicants are actually requesting. There are 4 different steps in the process for the new school. The first step is a UGB expansion. The city takes no part in that. That's done by Metro, and that's already been done. The UGB has already been expanded. Step 2 is actually where we are tonight. That's the application in front of you, and we're going to go over that in more detail in just a moment. The third step would be an annexation. The applicants have applied for an annexation, and we're processing that, but it's separate from the action tonight. And the last step would be an actual use permit, a conditional use permit and site plan. The applicant hasn't applied for that yet. So what is the application proposing tonight? Let's take a closer look at that. The application is proposing 4 distinct entitlements. They are a comprehensive plan text amendment, an amendment for the zoning map, adoption of a Title 11 comprehensive plan, and a refinement to the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. So let's go over each of these in a little bit more detail. The first is the amendment to the comprehensive plan. This shows a map of the entire city limits here. This shows the expanded UGB that was recently approved by Metro in August. This crosshatching is done to show that the entire city is covered with a comprehensive plan as we have right now. But you'll notice one thing is missing in the UGB area is that it doesn't have a comprehensive plan yet. Metro rules require that any property that be included in a city's comprehensive plan before it gets annexed into the city. In Sherwood, that means it needs to be included in Chapter 8. This is included, the applicant's proposed additions to Chapter 8 are included in your packet. The second request is for zoning to be pre-designated for the site. This is very similar to the comprehensive plan in that the zoning currently covers all of the city, but now we need to pre-designate some zoning for the property where the school site is proposed. Also, like the comprehensive plan, it must be designated to the property before the property is annexed into the city. That's why it's part of the action proposed tonight. The applicant is proposing a designation of institutional and public to the site. When Metro approved the expansion of the Sherwood UGB, they added a condition of approval that said that the site can only be used for a high school. So we had to walk a fine line while we were processing this to analyze what that site could possibly entail, but at the same time knowing full well that it could only be a high school. There is one distinct difference between the application of a comprehensive plan and the application of zoning here tonight. The comprehensive plan application to the property takes effect the moment that the council acts on it. But the zoning is actually a pre-designation to the site and will take effect upon the annexation of that property into the city. The third request by the applicant is for the adoption of a Title 11 concept plan. This kind of a concept plan is a requirement for Metro. A Title 11 concept plan is not a preliminary concept plan. You may have heard of the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. It's easy to confuse those, but they're actually very different. A preliminary concept plan, like the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan, is just that. It's preliminary. It's not an adopted plan. It's more like a vision for the city in that area of what's going to happen. And it paints with a very broad brush, so it doesn't include a lot of details. It just kind of contains a plan of what could be there and the way the city would like to go. Now, the Title 11 plan, on the other hand, is very formal. It's an adopted plan, and it contains far more detail. And what kind of detail does it include? It includes street plans and infrastructure plans, sewer plans, stormwater plans, lots of concrete plans that can be added in to our comprehensive plan. It also includes an intergovernmental agreement that makes it crystal clear who is providing which services and when. Like the comprehensive plan, the zoning for the Title 11 concept plan must also be adopted prior to the annexation to the city, which is why it's wrapped up with the entitlements we're requesting here tonight. The fourth and last request by the applicant is for a revision to the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. The applicant tried to find a site within the city where they could put this school, but they had a lot of very stringent requirements of their own. They needed at least 50 acres. They needed the site to drain properly. They couldn't really have it on a hill because that increased costs. And so they looked for a property within the city first, but they couldn't find any, which drove them out to the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. The concept plan included 2 different school sites that were already shown in the plan. The southern site that you see here circled met more of the school district's criteria and requirements. The school site on the plan was smaller though, and so as staff, we wanted to be sure that a larger school in that site didn't infringe on the adopted or the approved preliminary concept plan. So we had the applicant go through some analysis to see what that would do to the plan. As a result, we're having them modify the plan a little bit to accommodate a larger school site. So what did that do to the site? An unnamed street to the west of the school site was shifted a little bit over to make room for residential property in the west and to make that a more viable piece of land, because the road that was approved with the preliminary plan came a little bit too close to where the school was going to be. Some conceptual land uses were also located on where the larger school site is going to be and were therefore displaced by a larger school design. And so we've had those relocated. The applicant has designed them to be relocated outside the school property. At this time, all the city departments have reviewed these revisions to the preliminary plan and are in support of those. In addition, even though it wasn't required, the applicant held community meetings with the original groups that put together the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan to be sure that they were aware of that and to get feedback from them on these proposed changes. So that completes the project description. So now let's go through the various criteria that are required for an application like this. This list shows all of the required criteria and it looks a bit daunting, so let me break it down a little bit for you. It really breaks down into 4 sections. First, we have requirements from the zoning ordinance itself. Next, we have requirements from our comprehensive plan. There are some requirements from Metro that were analyzed as well. And then last are the consistency with the state goals. So let's go through each of these real quickly here, one at a time. First up is the criteria for the zoning ordinance. Many of these overlap with each other. There are criteria proposed for the comprehensive plan changes and a requirement to comply with the state's transportation planning rule, as you can see here. The comprehensive plan text changes must be based on need. And a lot of the applicant's materials that they provided to us went in great detail on the need, why they need the school now, why it needs to go here. And so most of those can be found in the applicant's materials. The zone change also had the same requirement that we go into the needs for the project. Again, that was met by the applicant's materials. The comprehensive text change also required it to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So did the zoning map. The zoning map change also required that it be consistent with our transportation system plan. That's the transportation master plan we have for the city in total. Right now, we added a condition of approval to the project in order to make the changes that the applicant are requesting consistent with our transportation system plan. So with that condition of approval in place, we're comfortable moving forward and saying it's consistent with this requirement. Last, there's a requirement that it be timely. Again, that ties back into the applicant's application materials that they provided. Consistency with the transportation planning rule is a whole different affair, and that took the bulk of our time processing this project. So our code requires the applicants to comply with the OAR, or Oregon Administrative Rules, sections on the transportation planning rule, or TPR. Now, I'm not going to try to do too many abbreviations tonight, but we talked a lot about the TPR, so that one I truncated for you. So what I propose, or showing you here on the screen, is a timeline. So the 2017 is today. The way these studies work, and I wanted to go over this in a little bit of detail, is that the transportation planning rule study looks at a horizon of 2035. So what it's going to do is it analyzes all the infrastructure improvements that are proposed in our transportation system plan, assumes they're built, and then analyzes the traffic at that level. Why that level? Because that's the same horizon year that our transportation system plan uses. So this study, for the school specifically, used that same horizon year. Then it applies the traffic that would be generated by the school and then tries to create mitigation for anything that needs to be mitigated, any areas that were in excess of what our transportation system plan was already designed to accommodate and handle. Now, this often gets confused, and I want to go over this a little bit too. When they come in for the use aspect of this case, the conditional use permit, they're going to give us a transportation impact study that is far more robust, and it's going to be far more detailed. And what that's going to do is it's going to show all the different mitigation that's required by the school to construct a high school on the site that opens by 2020. That's different from the transportation system plan study that we have here, which is only analyzing a zone change. It didn't look at the impacts of the construction of a high school. It just looked at the impacts of the change in zoning and what could possibly be on that site, and then created those mitigations. When they come in for a conditional use permit, that's going to contain a lot of mitigation. That will be in addition to the mitigation that was required by the TPR study that we did. And so those two will go together. Now, this effort that we went through was a team effort. We had several meetings here where we invited the county to come and participate. We invited ODOT. We invited anybody that we thought would be critical to building out this infrastructure. In the end, all the different parties agreed with the key points of this project, including the methodology and the final mitigation. There were 2 mitigation projects that were proposed as part of this. And they agreed with the key points in the end and eventually signed off on the TPR study. So we do have full agreement with all the different departments. The study identified reasonably likely funding for the required mitigation. Basically, the school is going to be paying for those 2 required mitigation projects. And as we said before, a condition of approval was added to ensure that those 2 mitigation projects will be consistent with our transportation system plan, because they're going to help us provide the update to that to make sure it's consistent in the future. So that was the zoning requirements. I wanted to go through the criteria required by our general plan, our comprehensive plan as well. So let's look at the requirements of the comprehensive plan. I'll try to go through these quickly. Chapter 3 talks about the growth management for the city. And it requires that there be no leapfrogging. This project is proposed right next to an existing housing tract within the city, so there's no issue there. It's consistent. It requires that you first look inside the city and then go out after you can't find what you need inside the city. The school has provided evidence that they've done that. It requires that the soils not be prime for agricultural reasons, and that was part of the Metro's UGB expansion. That's something that they analyzed there. So the applicant has met that requirement. It also requires that there be access and that the facilities be provided and that an intergovernmental agreement be provided. All of those are part of the Title 11 plan that's before you tonight. Chapter 4 looks at the land uses, and it looks at minimizing the effects of the possible project. The project right now isn't actual construction of a school, so we're going to be looking at minimizing the effects when the CUP comes in, not necessarily right now at this stage. It also requires that you include public uses. It's a school. I think we hit that threshold. It requires that the project enhance the community. Oftentimes, the school acts as a center point or a focal point for a community, so we felt they complied with that. And then it also requires that you enhance the natural beauty of the area and promote an innovative design. Again, those are done at the design stage with the conditional use permit, not necessarily at this stage. Chapter 5 was for the environmental resources, conserving scenic views, conserving historic aspects, environmental quality, and recreational resources. Those will all be looked at the conditional use phase. But we can say at this point that we're not aware of any historic or cultural areas or sites of significance on the site. And as far as recreational resources are concerned, normally schools aren't required to build out parks, but in this case, the school has indicated that they plan on entering into a joint use agreement with our parks department to use the fields on the school site after the school is closed on weekends. Chapter 6 looks at the transportation requirements of our comprehensive plan, and it requires that there be choices from the project, that it not just be cars. That they look at bikes and pedestrians and bus and transit. We'll look at those at the CUP stage more than we will now, and so we're going to be comparing the project against that at a later phase. It also requires that we be mindful to the freight areas in our city. The closest freight corridors to the project site are Highway 99, and with the mitigation that's been proposed as part of the TSP update, we should be compliant with that requirement. Chapter 7 looks at the community facilities and says that we have to be compliant with all the different cities' master plans, sewer, stormwater, things of that nature. Those are all shown to you today in the Title 11 plan, and they've all been looked at by the city, and we're willing to say that that's consistent with that requirement. Chapter 8 looks at the urban growth boundary additions, and most of these we've seen already. No leapfrogging. We have to make sure that access is provided. The facilities have to be there. We have to encourage development within the city first. So all of those were also addressed by other chapters. The last requirement on there is that we make sure that we transition and buffer to surrounding uses. And again, we're going to look at that a lot closer at the CUP stage than we could at this stage because there's no buildings proposed quite yet. So that addresses the comprehensive plan. So let's take a look at what Metro's requirements are for a Title 11 plan. Most of them revolved around the comprehensive plan requirements that is moving forward. It's not necessarily with the other three entitlements. The Metro Code outlines several different requirements for the comprehensive plan update. The designation must be applied before the project gets annexed. We've already talked about that. That's not a problem. They're proposing IP. And it also requires the zoning to be done. In this city, we have a one map system, which means that our zoning map is our comprehensive land use map. And so by adding zoning, they're adding a comprehensive land use designation as well. It also requires that the change provide for schools. We felt they hit that benchmark. The change requires that they provide for parks. And again, generally parks aren't required for schools, but we have a joint use agreement that we can enter into. Again, that's not necessarily part of this application. That's part of the conditional use permit that will come along later, but it certainly bears mentioning at this point. And it also requires that the street plans be provided for the project, and that was provided both through the Title 11 and through the condition of approval to update the transportation system plan down the road. Last, the school district will provide all the funds that are required for infrastructure, so they hit that benchmark requirement too. Last, and I promise this is it, is the state requirements for the 19 planning goals. I am not going to go over each one of the 19 individually, but I will say that many of the state goals are addressed already through city ordinances and the comprehensive plan that we've done. Many others are requirements to the city and not necessarily on an applicant, such as economic development and housing. Others are addressed by Metro, such as the UGB expansion project process and growth there. And still others simply don't apply to the city of Sherwood, like coastal areas and sand dune preservation. So based on staff's review and the entirety of the record, we feel that the project complies with, or at least does not impede, any of these state goals. So that brings us to the recommendation. Before I went into the recommendation, what I wanted to do is go over a memo that was handed out. Each of you received a memo, or are about to receive a memo, and there are additional memos in the back of the room for any members of the audience that would like one of those memos as well. I want to go over, we're doing 4 things in this memo that we handed out. We got a late-breaking letter that came in yesterday, and so we included that in here. It's from an attorney who wrote us similar letters on the Planning Commission staff reports as well. We wrote a full analysis of her comments, and the applicant's attorney provided a letter that's in your staff report that also responds to this attorney's concerns. And she didn't raise anything new that we didn't feel was already addressed in the record. So we felt we satisfied that requirement, and that's all in this report here for you. We inadvertently left a couple of pieces out of your staff report, and we apologize for that, and we've added them in here. One was the memo that went to the Planning Commission on November 14th, and the second was a small staff report that we gave to the Planning Commission on the second Planning Commission hearing, which was November 28th. And so we've now included that in the memo here as well. The staff report you got already reflected all of the changes that staff report was outlining, so you've seen all the effects of what the Planning Commission changed at the hearing. That's all there. Last but not least, at the very end of this memo, we included a few minor changes to the ordinance that we put in here. And what we did, as you flip to the last 3 pages, you'll be able to see this, is we've revised the findings section, section 2 in the ordinance. And if it pleases the council, I'm happy to read out loud that findings section. It's provided for you here in print, but I'll read it out loud as well, just that one section. After full due consideration of the proposal, staff reports, the record, and the findings and evidence presented at the public hearings, the council finds that the proposed Sherwood High School concept plan and comprehensive plan map and text amendments are consistent with all applicable local, regional, and state requirements. The following documents, including but not limited to, compromise the findings of fact and evidence relied upon: the City Council staff report dated December 19th, which you have, the attachments 1 and 4 to that report, and the November 14th memorandum from Mr. Strait to the Sherwood Planning Commission, and the DKS November 13th, 2017 Transportation Planning Rule Analysis Memo. That's a mouthful. All we really did here was try to clarify what exactly we used for the findings. Before, we simply stated they were included in the record. This time we got a little bit more detailed and said exactly where we think they are. With that, staff recommends that the City Council hold a hearing take testimony, and continue this item to January. Should you choose to adopt it tonight, as the recorder indicated you could, it's important to note that you will have to first approve the changes that have been made to the ordinance here, and then you can adopt the ordinance. So it's going to be a two-step process should you decide to go forward with that tonight. But with that, that concludes staff's presentation. Myself and the applicants are available for any questions that you might have.
Council, do we have any questions at this point? Please.
It's kind of a trivial question, but what is leapfrogging? I didn't see that in any of these materials.
It's a planning term. Really what it means is that you're jumping over potential sites to develop someplace else. So if you have a nice large rural area next to the city and somebody decides they want to build on the other side of that rural area, then it's not really contiguous to the city. It's not next to it in any way. And so that's considered leapfrogging because you're jumping over the natural progression of where development should go as you slowly grow out from a city. And so in this case, we're saying we're not leapfrogging because it's right next to some existing homes. Good question. Very good question.
Well, you mentioned it twice. I didn't see that anywhere.
It's a planning term of art. Shame on me for using it.
No worries, no worries. I appreciate the explanation. My other question was, you mentioned that there was an additional site or additional sites that were considered but weren't appropriate. Could you share where those sites were?
I think I'll bump that to the applicant.
Okay.
They have extensive and detailed analysis of those. It was provided in the narrative. When they give us the application, they give us a large narrative of where they go through how they felt we met all the criteria. And in that, they spent quite a bit of time showing all the different alternative locations. Most of them were simply too small, but they could do a much better job explaining to you where those were and why they did or didn't meet the criteria.
Would you like that?
I'm just curious where they were.
There was a few of them that they looked at.
I think we had a map at one time that showed them.
Probably
Yeah.
before I was on council.
Yeah. I had a question.
Did you want to respond to her?
Oh, I don't have the map with me, so we'll let the applicants answer that when they get there. I
Okay.
did have a question, though.
Please.
On the page 46 of the packet, there was a recommendation, and on there it says the application does not fully meet the applicable review criteria. However, the applicable criteria can be satisfied if specific conditions are met, and then it lists a couple conditions. What happens if these conditions aren't met? If we approve this ordinance, what happens if these aren't met?
Well, conditions of approval are often very difficult for zoning changes and comprehensive plan changes because they're very binary. They're
Right.
either on or they're off. It's one zone or it's not. And so normally if this were a project that didn't have an implementing project right around the corner, that could be a little bit more problematic. But because the Metro put the condition of approval on their approval, saying this could only be a high school, we felt comfortable adding conditions of approval to the project, knowing full well it could only ever be a high school. Should the high school not go there, then there simply won't be any development taking place on that site until another idea comes along that would then have to go back through Metro because it would have to comply with their condition.
And Counselor, if I can chime in, I think your question was, what if we approve this without those conditions? Was that?
No, what if we approve this with the conditions and then the conditions aren't satisfied?
Okay, you can, basically, we have ensured that will occur because they won't be able to get to annexation and development
Okay.
unless those conditions have been
That
met.
was what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
A quick question. So I think you said it was on the Title 11 plan that had to be approved before, and I don't recall what was the trigger that if that didn't get approved, what's the
Yeah, that has to
what's
happen
the
before
consequences?
annexation.
What happens if it's not?
Then they couldn't annex.
Okay.
Because basically what the Title 11 plan does is it fills in all the gaps that a comprehensive plan would say. You're telling the city where your water is going to come from, where your transportation impacts are going to be, and where the streets are going to be, and where the stormwater is going to be. Without that Title 11 plan, we really couldn't plug it into the comprehensive plan, so that's why that's required.
That's why it's rolled into
so they
all
couldn't
of
do
this.
an annexation.
Got it.
All the pieces you're seeing here tonight, shy of the revision to the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan, all the other changes have to take place before annexation. The revision to the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan was more for us to be able to stand in front of you with a very straight face and say that we've analyzed it against that study, that visioning study, and that we think it's consistent with it.
Please.
On page 25, in the second paragraph, it says the applicant has indicated that they will provide the funding for these mitigation projects. I'm assuming this is in writing somewhere? In the spirit of fiduciary responsibility?
It is. It's a needle in the haystack in your documents up there, but it is provided in the city council packet that we gave you. There's a letter from the applicants indicating that they're very happy to pay for those mitigation projects.
Okay. And then my last question, at least for now, is on page 24. In the last paragraph, it talks about the trips were analyzed up to the year 2035, and you were talking about that in your presentation. What does that analysis look like? I mean, how can we project out that far?
Oh, well, we have the actual person who drafted that study here, and he could give you a much better answer than that.
Excellent.
But it's based primarily on modeling, and he's using transportation models to project out what that traffic will look like. And then he compares that to the level of service for the intersections, and then sees if he meets the threshold once we add in the school's traffic. He could be much more eloquent in answering that question than I can.
Well, honestly, that's the biggest question out there that I hear from people is the traffic. So thank you very much.
Sure, understandable.
Any other questions?
I just had a
Please.
question on that.
Mayor, I have a question. This is Tim.
Please.
Councilor Rosner. You talked about part of this is adopting the Title 11 concept plan. Is that concept plan specifically apply to the area that we're talking about expanding the UGB around it and the annexation? I guess where I'm going with this is, does this in any way limit our flexibility with the overall Sherwood West expansion if we want to change that in the future in terms of how that's zoned and laid out?
No, that's a good question. Yes, the Title 11 concept plan only applies to the square that they're talking about developing now. It's true. It only plugs in the infrastructure there. Does it limit the flexibility in the future? In a sense, it does, because they're making concrete what is still vague right now. But they're plugging in details that we feel are consistent with the vision for that area. They're consistent with the Sherwood West plan. And so it's just really bringing it into a reality. But in a way, it is limiting the future flexibility because now we're nailing down where the water's coming in and where the streets are and things like that. But I think the key there is that we feel it's consistent with what was envisioned for the area. So we're comfortable moving forward with that.
And I'm going to chime in. This is Julia, Councilor Rosner. Because we had a conversation earlier today, so I know what he's specifically getting at. The Sherwood West preliminary concept plan refinement is still just a vision, and what we're nailing down is what's happening on the school site specifically, and the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan remains a preliminary concept plan that will be refined as that area is brought into the urban growth boundary.
Correct. Even the changes they're proposing to that plan are still just preliminary changes. They're just showing this that the school can still function in the confines of that plan. But outside the school's property is still very flexible.
Great, thank you.
Please.
I just had one last question, and I was surprised to see, and I had heard this through the planning commission, that the school district was going to be required to have if I'm understanding this right, 2 turn lanes coming from the Newburgh side to turn onto Elwert. Is that a county requirement that was put on them, or?
That's more an outgrowth of the modeling and the transportation plan. The county, it's not necessarily a county requirement in that the county was there with us when we were reviewing what the transportation engineer was explaining would be required. And they eventually bought off on those models, but that wasn't something where the county came in and asked that be added.
Okay.
But they certainly bought off on the design that was proposed in the traffic study.
So I had another question. So I think you had mentioned that the initial traffic study that we've looked at is based off of the zoning of institutional and public, and there'll be a follow-up traffic study done later with the conditional use. Can you give an example or a few examples of what else falls under the institutional and public zoning? Just so, I know we're putting a school in there, but I don't have any other concept of what else that means.
Hospitals, sometimes parks, churches, other kinds of schools would fall in there, elementary schools.
Okay.
City Hall.
Okay. So larger buildings that aren't necessarily businesses, industry.
Right. And to be honest, while we were reviewing it, the hospital was the one that gave us the most concern because hospitals could be very, very intense and have a lot of impacts. And if it weren't for that one condition of approval by Metro, the analysis before you would have been far more robust, because that could have still been a possibility. Even if the school swore it was going to be a high school, we couldn't take that into account necessarily if it weren't for that one condition of approval. So that certainly limited the analysis and made it a lot easier to mold this site and this approval before you today.
And Metro's requirement was a high school.
They were specific to a high school, yes. They sure were. Yeah.
Council, any further questions or comments?
One more for me, Mayor. You mentioned earlier that there'll be a refinement to the traffic plan, or I think we did the TPR that we've done now. That'll be refined in a lot more detail. I'm assuming we'll have the opportunity to look at that in terms of the safety of that intersection at Sunset 99 for our students that will be crossing that, and there may be potential refinements at that point.
Yeah, the update that we were talking about was to the transportation system plan, and really what it's going to do is reflect the increased mitigation that is being brought on by the school. So really just the two projects that were identified in the TPR analysis that we gave you. Those two will be added into the TSP. That will take an action by the council, and so it will certainly be before you. Likely, it's going to be in conjunction with the conditional use permit. That way you can see a much larger picture and all the mitigation suite that is being added by the school, but only those two, and I might need Bob's help on this one, only those two will be required to be added to the TSP. Likely the transportation impact plan for the CUP won't result in any mitigation that will impact the TSP, I believe.
So, and I'm just going to clarify. So there will be a refined traffic study associated with the conditional use and site plan that's going to look more at day of opening rather than 20 years out, and it doesn't assume that everything that's in the TSP is done. But most likely that will not come to council, so you will see a TSP amendment, but you won't actually be reviewing the traffic study associated with the site plan conditional use unless the Planning Commission decision were appealed to you.
And on that same subject, those of us that drive Sunset and to try to take a left on 99 risk a whole lot of life or death things as we make that turn, and having an arrow that says, yes, you can go left, or a lane that goes along with that would be a much appreciated thing, and we understand that that can follow on with what you're saying.
Right.
Anything else, Council? If not, we sure thank you, and we will go ahead and open the public hearing for the first reading of this ordinance.
Sorry, I was going to say, and Mayor, as you're waiting for the applicant to come up and provide their testimony, I just wanted to let you know for the record that we emailed the memo that Matt handed out to Councilor Rosner, so he did have that in front of him. So,
thank you.
So Mayor, those are the sign-up sheets. I believe the first few are the applicant. So if you keep them in order, you should be.
Let's keep it in the same order.
Right.
Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Mayor and council members, I am Heather Cordy. I'm the superintendent of the Sherwood School District. And on behalf of our board of directors and our team in the district, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you this evening. It's an exciting step in this really important journey for our community. As you know, we are here tonight to present to you and ask for your approval of our comprehensive plan amendment, zone change, and Title 11 concept plan. And just, it's kind of hard to believe that it's been a little bit over a year since our voters supported the passage of the Sherwood School District's bond. And we all know how much our community is trusting in the school district with the support of partners like you to carry out the promises of that bond on time and within budget. We also know that it can be very tempting when a large revenue stream comes into the picture for other entities, sometimes perhaps at the state level or the county level, to look at those funds as opportunities to fund projects that may not have otherwise been tended to beyond the scope of what we're looking at here. And I just want to thank you in advance for your support in coming alongside the school district as we work really diligently to ensure that the taxpayers' dollars are looked after appropriately in order to do the very best that we can for the 5,200 students in our care. So it's without any further delay that I would like to introduce our team who will be presenting to you this evening. Mr. Brad Kilby with HHPR, Karina Ruiz with Brick Architecture, and Scott Manser with DKS. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, Counselor, Mr. Mayor. Some of you I know, some of you are new to me, but I was the planning manager at the time of the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. So before I started, I wanted to draw Counselor Browse's attention. It's page 27 in our packet, page 27 of 62, that looks at the analysis of the different properties that we looked at. We looked initially inside the city. Obviously, there's no 50-acre sites here for any of you that took part in that preliminary concept plan and the associated housing needs analysis study that we were looking at that time. There's not a lot of acreage in the city.
Would you move the microphone, please,
Sure.
closer?
That would fit those needs. And then, of course, the existing school district, the existing high school has been expanded on multiple occasions, and they feel like they're at their max to provide that. So then on that analysis, you'll look. We also analyzed several pieces of property in Sherwood West. And I should just note that when we passed the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan, that the preliminary concept plan was intended to be a high-level discussion, and it was to talk about growth and to talk about the provision of services, and most importantly, to talk to the people in that area and within the city of Sherwood about the potential for growing in that direction. It was intended to be a tool to you, the council, as you considered future amendments to the urban growth boundary. We did not speak specifically to any type of zoning that was going to be applied in that area. We talked about the provision of basic services, utilities, transportation was huge in that study, and we talked about the need to provide 2 schools. When you're planning at that level, you don't know the details of what's going to actually come on the ground. So the ask for that we're coming to you tonight is actually the refinement plan of this specific area. We are bound by that decision, as is the city, to put a high school in that location as part of the UGB amendment through Metro. The next step then for us is to get this concept plan approved and then move into the annexation phase. The annexation is at the city now. We're at the point right now where we're trying to decide which method we're going to pursue, whether it's going to be an election or Senate Bill 1573. I think we're having some discussions on that tomorrow, and we'll make the decision to proceed based on some of what we hear from you tonight. So the refinement plan looks more specifically and addresses issues related to land use, zoning, and specific provisions for the area. So now we're tying into where exactly the services are going to come in, how the land's going to be used, and then looking at those impacts. The 2035 analysis on traffic, and I'll let Mr. Manser speak to that, is just that. It is, we look at the TSP, we look at what should occur over that planning horizon, and should those improvements go in, and what the background traffic is, and then we apply our modeling to that, and then we say, well, these are the improvements that you need to maintain the function of the state highways. It's the transportation planning rule, applies to all state roadways. And then when we get into the traffic impact analysis for the conditional use, we'll look more specifically at the use of the site as a high school. The next one. There's been extensive community outreach on this project. It's been over a year, and in the last 10 months alone, there have been, I calculated on average, a meeting per month to discuss this, to update the community on what's going on. We've come to the Planning Commission on 3 separate occasions, and we've met with the council early, I think it was in April, mid-April, with the council, just to kind of provide an update. When I was working on a Sherwood West preliminary concept plan, one of the first questions that Connie and I asked the landowners out there, and we interviewed, I want to say 98 of 128 property owners out in that area, and the people within the community. What makes Sherwood, what makes it great? And you know, a lot of people, that's kind of an esoteric question. They didn't really have good answers, but all of them, without doubt, said schools are one of the things that attracted them to this area. And I echo that sentiment that when businesses look to come into a community, they're looking at, do you have a strong school system? I mean, do you provide a good schools? Do you provide a variety of housing? Is it an attractive place to be? Are there parks? Are there things that my employees would look to come in to? And so I think that this is just a symptom of a good community, is making sure that you're planning for these future public facilities as well as private facilities as you move forward. It clearly has the support of the Sherwood voters. We've got a lot of strong support. I think you'll hear that tonight from some of the people that actually use the facility, as well as some of the board members that have listened to the community over the past probably 2 years now, working up to that bond. So. The proposed zoning is institutional and public. I think that Councilor Griffin will be aware of the fact that one of my favorite sayings that your chair of your planning commission says is that we should be making the right thing the easiest thing to do. And for 2 reasons, the public and institutional zoning on this property makes sense. One, it ensures that the metro condition can be met. And 2, it is a public and institutional use that we would be ultimately asking to go onto this property. So it makes sense to have that. I'm going to turn over the presentation to Mr. Manser. There were quite a few questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to speak a little bit about the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. One of my favorite topics because I worked on it so long. But there were 2 options, if you remember, and really the only difference in those options were the alignment of Elwert Road as it went. You either went straight or you go around, and I don't believe that this decision would impede that future decision on that. And then, of course, the school site gets big. But again, I'm telling you, when you're doing a refinement plan up here, you don't really know what your exact needs are going to be until you start working within that context. The school district did study different properties in the area outside of what the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan, the 2 areas that were identified for schools, and we settled on the southern one because that made the most sense for the existing services that were in place and the costs that would be associated with developing this as opposed to the northern piece. So,
So I'm going to then walk you through the proposed refinements that we have to the existing accepted Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. So as Mr. Kilby here spoke about, you can see in the preliminary concept plan, there was a school located in the southern zone of the preliminary West concept plan. I think Mr. Straight did a fantastic job of basically giving our presentation for us, which is great. That really talks about the areas where we were working the most closely to ensure that we were consistent with the direction of the preliminary Sherwood West concept plan. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. The main area of concern, there were 2 areas that we worked pretty closely with the city planners and with Brad's help, trying to bring back the original views of the preliminary concept plan. The first, as you heard earlier, is the alignment of the road that runs to the west side of the school, and moving that to provide for better developable land adjacent to it on the western edge of our property. And then also looking at what was originally proposed as mixed-use residential on the southern end of what is our school site, as well as along Handley further north on Elwert. And so what we wanted to do, again, given the preliminary nature of the preliminary concept plan, was to ensure that we were still providing the same quantity of services in roughly the same locations, to ensure that, again, that we were maintaining consistency there. So that is essentially what we're proposing. We understand that the majority of the concerns of the community, as Brad said, we've met with the community a number of times. I will tell you, they didn't care too much about my architecture. What they really wanted to talk about was traffic, as you can understand. So we're going to leave the remainder of our time for Mr. Manser to walk through the traffic planning rule traffic study.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Scott Manser. I'm a traffic engineer with DKS Associates, and just want to walk you through kind of the traffic study we did and be happy to answer any questions you have. So the two traffic studies that are remaining to be completed is first the transportation planning rule that Mr. Straight did a great job of explaining. And that's really a high-level evaluation where we're looking at a 2035 horizon year. And we have transportation models that are looking at growth forecasts for Sherwood and other communities in the Portland metropolitan area. And in that, it's looking at residential and commercial land uses, and it forecasts what the community is going to look like, what it's going to be when it grows up 20 years out. And it creates a traffic model, creates traffic generated from each of those different uses. And so the study we're looking at now is the 2035 TPR analysis. The next study we're going to do is and one thing to back up, we had to look at a worst case evaluation. So for that public use and for our site, we evaluated our TPR analysis that's before you today, looked at 2,400 students. And there really isn't a plan for 2,400 students, but again, for the requirements, the state requirements and the Goal 12 analysis, we had to look at the highest and best use, and so we looked at 2,400 students. Which leads into the following study, which is going to be our site plan and land use application. The traffic study is conducted for that. That's going to look at day of opening. It's going to focus on all the school district's planned changes to the elementary schools, the middle school, and the high school. It'll look at the different shifts. It will be taking the high school from its current location, relocating it in our proposed location, and look at just at the day of opening of 2020. That study will also evaluate, it will do a safe routes to school plan where we'll look at crossings and look at how within the school district's walking boundary and how kids are going to get from neighborhoods to the school, making sure that there's sidewalks, there's crossings to be evaluated as part of that study. Some other components of the TPR analysis. Again, it answers the question, is the proposed land use designation consistent with what was planned? And your current transportation system plan assumed future growth. It assumed the 20-year student numbers, but they assumed those at the existing high school. So a lot of those student and parent trips were already in the model, but they were in the current location. And as we learned, that they really can't support that. And so a lot of the trips are in the system, but we're now relocating it to a new area, and that's why our traffic study was determining from the city's transportation system plan, what are the new impacts, what are the significant impacts that we have, and what are the mitigations that are required to basically improve or fix the issues that were created with the relocation of the high school. The next thing is, again, were there any impacts that we created on the second bullet, and making sure that we're mitigating so we don't have a Goal 12 significant effect determined. Evaluating, again, the worst case institutional public zone for the site, which for our TPR analysis was 2,400 students, which is about 20% more students than really planned at this time, and at full build out of the school. And ultimately, it identifies the significant impacts and the mitigations that are required to meet ODOT, county, and the city's mobility standards. And just to share, Mr. Straight laid out, explained a lot of the coordination that has been done, but for pretty much the summer and fall, we were meeting routinely with the city, the county, and ODOT to go through the methodology, the findings. I think we went through about 4 rounds of our traffic study till we got to a point where everybody was in agreement. There was some questioning about kind of the modeling and what I shared a little bit about. What were the assumptions at the existing high school, and how does that affect relocating it and that shift in trips and parent trips? There was also a lot of questions about trip generation, what our assumptions were, and making sure that we were using a conservative approach. What we found, and I've been working on school studies in Sherwood for probably 15 years, and parents like to drive their kids. And so a lot of times one of the things you find in Sherwood is you have a lot higher trip generation than a lot of other areas. So that's some of the coordination that's gone on through this process. And as I've heard, we had many of the open houses with the public. We would always open up to questions, and I was the lucky duck to get about 90% of the questions related to traffic, and because there's a lot of traffic in Sherwood, and especially on 99. And this figure shows the current mobility standards and targets from ODOT and the city and the county are all 0.99 volume to capacity. This is a real technical term, and I'm going to try to explain to you what volume to capacity is. Each intersection or roadway is built for a certain amount of capacity. And if you think about a cup, a glass, and if you fill it up with water, if you fill it up to the top, it would be at capacity, and that would be a capacity of 1.0. But if it was at 0.9, it would be 90% full. And that's how we basically manage and evaluate the transportation system. And that 0.99 means that that's your standard, that it's right at capacity. And usually when you start seeing a volume to capacity of 0.9, anywhere from 0.9 up to 1.0 is when you start seeing long congestion, long delays. You can sit at a signal, and sometimes it takes you 2 or 3 cycles. Your approach that you're on gets a green, and then it's a red, and it may takes a little while to get through. But that's when you start seeing a lot of congestion. As you can see from many of our study intersections, there's a lot of congestion that we have to deal with. And remember, in our TPR analysis, our requirement is to evaluate our impacts. We're not required to fix everything, but we're required to figure out what are we impacting with our development and identifying improvements to mitigate those. Some of the kind of things I wanted to share, I've already covered the first bullet, but I wanted to share a little bit about the trip generation, and that's the second bullet. As you look, if we were just evaluating a new school at this site, there's standard trip generation rates that are based on national data from high schools all over the United States. And as you can see, that's in the table. The standard rates would have basically 0.43 trips in the morning per student, and then 0.13 trips per student. And one of the things we did is we actually counted Sherwood High School. We counted the existing high school. And as you can see, it was significantly higher than those rates. In fact, it was 37% higher than kind of the standard rates. But as you look at standard traffic engineering practices, they don't want you just to use one data point. They feel that that's really concerning. And so they actually would recommend that you collect 5 high schools in the general area. And since Sherwood only has 1 high school, we had to use data from other high schools in the Beaverton and Wilsonville area that had similar communities, similar demographics. And we counted those, and that's where we came up with our ITE recommended local rates. And when we worked with the agencies, we ended up deciding to go ahead and just use, even though it's against kind of standard engineering practices, it was still a conservative approach. And we used those trip rates from the existing Sherwood High School, and we applied that to the new high school. And those are about 37% higher than kind of your standard practice of what we would typically use. And this is just the student growth. There's also other growth that has been evaluated through this process. One of the things I wanted to point out, though, is a lot of times the existing high school site has 300 students. And there was some questions. 300 parking spaces. The new parking lot is going to have, I think, close to 800 parking stalls. And so I think a lot of times people think, okay, well, we're going to have 800 parking stalls, and right now we have 300. That's going to be a lot more traffic. We're going to have a lot more kids driving. And actually, in traffic engineering, that's actually not the case, and I'll explain why. The more parking you can provide, a lot of times, the more students are actually available to drive. And by allowing students to drive to the school, that creates one trip. But if you have a limited parking where a lot of students can't drive, and especially in a community like Sherwood where you have a lot of parents that are driving their kids, when a parent drives from their home, drops off their child, and then drives back to the same intersections, they create twice the trips as a student trip. And so just as you're thinking through, sometimes as you add parking, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to double or triple. And a lot of that excessive parking is really for the big high school playoff games where you're trying to provide those large events. So that was just something that came up to the Planning Commission. I wanted to kind of clarify that. Trip distribution, we worked with the school district as we looked to the future, and also for this TPR analysis, we were looking out 20 years. So we weren't just looking at existing households, we were looking at where the households are also going to be in the future and evaluated our growth. Some of the areas of growth would be the Sherwood West area as well as the Brookman area, or some areas of large growth. Let's see. And through our study, we also worked with each of the agencies to identify what are the planned improvements, what are planned and funded improvements, and we only used those projects in the TSP and in the county plans and in the ODOT plans that were reasonably likely to be funded. Anything else that there wasn't an identified funding source, we did not use those assumptions in our traffic study. In the land use, as we talk about the model, it made an assumption of 4.5% of household growth in this area. Our student trip growth in the model was basically a 70% increase in students over the planning horizon in the model. And again, the existing school sites were those locations where that growth was assumed. The planned improvements that were identified by the city, county, and ODOT included the 99 Tualatin Sherwood Road improvements, the 99 Meineke improvements, Kruger Elwert Roundabout. Washington County has plans for a single lane roundabout, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to need to do for that planned improvement. ODOT had some, and the city had some planned improvements at 99 Sunset, nothing significant, but there was some improvements planned there. Elwert improvements, mainly bringing it up, urban upgrades, sidewalks, bike facilities, and then also Washington County identified a reasonably likely funding for a new roundabout, single lane roundabout, E.D. Elwert. Although they put a big caveat that a lot of public involvement is going to be needed until they really figure out what that true improvement is, but we were able to assume that through our traffic study. As you can see from our 2035 operations, all of our study intersections on Highway 99 failed and were significantly over capacity as you looked in the future growth that was assumed in the model. And the other intersection that we found that failed was the E.D. Elwert intersection. Many of those are which this included those planned improvements that we just discussed. In our traffic study, as I mentioned earlier, it assumed that basically the 2,400 high school students were shifted from the current high school to the new high school location. And then it assumed 720 students would relocate from Laurel Ridge Middle School to the current high school site, and also from Sherwood Middle School, 1,080 students. And remember, those are 20-year projections from the model. Those are not what's planned in the current bond for the middle school shifts to the current high school location.
Just freaking us out a little bit.
Yeah. So in the same way we had that 2,400 students for the high school, it's that same relationship to the middle school of growth. And as we looked at our 20 years and looking at households and growth in Sherwood, this is kind of what the boundary lays out as far as households to support the high school. About 40% of the residents are going to be on the high school side of 99W, and about 60% will exist on the opposite side where the current high school is relocated. And so this is the distribution that was used as we evaluated the student and parent trips to the site. Yeah, and that, as we looked at, when we worked with the school district and looked at a lot of the current households, the current distribution is actually very similar today as it will be in the future. So this is a graphic that is trying to help understand kind of that shift in traffic from what was assumed in your transportation system plan to where we're at today. And as you think about, you know, the shifting of those students that I talked about, shifting the middle school from one side of 99 to the other, what we found is we evaluated the difference in parent trips, buses, and students. At the three intersections at Roy Rogers, Edie, and Handley, actually our net, as you looked at how the trips were going to hit those intersections, we're actually going to have a net decrease in project trips at those three intersections on 99. And why that's occurring is that you're having a much more significant concentration of trips at the 99 Sunset intersection. And so as you're seeing more cross traffic, so as you look at the cross traffic from residences on one side to the opposite side of 99, a lot of that traffic is concentrated at 99 Sunset, but you're going to have, it's very small reductions, but there are little reductions in actual project trips. And I'll give you an example of how maybe the existing high school would be different than the new high school. If you purchased and built a home in Brookman in the future, and if you were going to drive to the existing high school, you'd likely drive north on 99 and you'd use the Meineke intersection to access the high school. So you've basically, your trip hit two different intersections. Well, now that with the current high school site, that one trip isn't going to go through two intersections, it's actually going to go through one. And so as you start looking at how the redistribution of traffic is for the different schools, there's going to be less traffic at those three intersections, but you're going to have significantly more at the Sunset intersection, which is why we have over $2 million worth of improvements that we're going to be doing at that intersection. I'm almost done, last slide. So our recommendations was that the district has proposed to reconstruct the 99 Sunset intersection. The rough cost estimate is about $2.2 million. They're going to be adding northbound dual left turn lanes. We're going to be widening Elwert for those additional turn lanes. And a lot of those dual turn lanes will be supporting a lot of that the Brookman traffic that's going to be accessing the high school site. It also significantly reduces the delay at that intersection. And also the single lane roundabout that was planned by Washington County, we've recommended that be a double lane roundabout to support all the school traffic that's going to be coming from 99 to the school. That is roughly the added cost to Washington County is right now estimated about $2.1 million. So our next steps as we start looking at the site plan analysis and looking at our short term, we're going to be doing a safe routes to school evaluation. We're going to be actually looking at traffic demand management program and looking at different ways to reduce traffic to the school. We're also going to be looking at neighborhood traffic impacts and determining if there's going to be spillover on any of the neighborhoods and what types of mitigations will be needed to mitigate those impacts, as well as site access and circulation, looking at safety for kids coming to and from the site on bicycles, pedestrian, on sidewalks, but also in the parking area and making sure that the parking and bus areas are safe. And with that, I'll open it up to your questions.
Sorry, just one more thing. So I just wanted to also let you know that your planning commission also supported the recommendation of staff. So we come here tonight with that. And I also wanted to respectfully request that if you approve our request, that you conduct both readings this evening. The school district's on a very tight timeline to try and get this open by 2020. And the quicker we can have things moving through the process, the better we're off. And that is if you are inclined to approve it tonight. And with that, we open it up to any questions you might have.
Questions, Councilor?
This is Tim. I have a question about the intersection at 99 and Sunset. You were talking about the improvements. I think the big improvement you talked about was the two left-hand turn lanes for northbound. Are they going to are you looking at also reconfiguring the lights? For instance, the east-west traffic across there's no turn lanes today. So it just takes one car to back up a lot of people trying to turn. I was curious what the thoughts were there.
I'm going off memory, but I believe, Bob, the planned improvement also included the widening and additional turn lanes at that intersection. That's why we haven't shown that. Am I?
The city has a TSP plan project for the south side of Sunset.
Okay.
At Highway 99.
And that was one of the planned improvements, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Bob isn't on the mic, so can you repeat that?
Yes, I'll repeat.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, when I had gone through the planned improvements that were already identified and allowed, that included the widening and turn lanes on Sunset. So I was just identifying what was required above and beyond that already planned and financially constrained project.
Okay, so the school's only paying for the above and beyond piece that you just discussed, and how's the rest of that being funded?
So
Unless I misunderstood.
I guess I'll answer. I mean, it's really the applicant's questions, but since that was a question. So basically, in our transportation system plan, we have a whole slew of improvements, and then we look at potential funding sources, including SDCs, TDT, MISTIP, regional funds, and look at what is reasonably likely to be funded when we look at that whole pot of money. So we don't know specifically how that will be funded, but it is within the realm of what we believe reasonably likely can be funded in the 20-year planning period.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So I have a couple questions for you, Scott.
Sure.
There's one slide where you talked about the volume to capacity ratios. It was one of the very beginning slides. I think this is it. So at what, obviously, did you say in transportation planning, 1 equals full capacity, and that's what you're hoping for, what you're looking for?
Well, I mean, technically, if
okay.
you're not, I mean, if I'm driving through the intersection, I'm hoping for 0.75 or 0.6.
Well, that leads me to my next question, which is at what point in that ratio do people start to complain about traffic?
Yeah, about 0.9.
0.9.
Yeah, 0.9 and above is usually when you start
to hear people complaining about traffic. Okay. And then my second question is, for the assumptions on the traffic in the Sherwood West area on Elwert, what were the assumptions made about zoning in terms of density of housing? Is it medium density, low density, high density? Just thinking about the number of families and how that factored into your number of cars on the road and trips.
Yeah. So I know, and I'm not as familiar with the West Concept Plan, but I know that the model was consistent with the residential assumptions in Sherwood West.
So Elwert is a higher classified road, so we would have assumed that there would be higher densities along that corridor, which is, I'm not sure if this actually works into the modeling, but when you assume those higher densities, one of the reasons you assume those higher densities is that as transit modifications and improvements are made, they'll be made to those major roadways as opposed to the minor roadways. And so I'm not sure if we accounted for transit because Sherwood hasn't been a beneficiary of transit, of really good transit over the last 20 or 30 years. But as the area in general continues to grow, and I always remind people in Sherwood that if you want to stop growing, that doesn't mean that Beaverton stops growing, Tualatin stops growing, Newburgh stops growing. So all this traffic that a lot of people complain about is a lot of cut-through traffic that you get congestion-wise. So the more improvements you can make to your community to make sure that jobs are in the community, that the community is walkable, that you have good access to transit, you're going to minimize those impacts within your community so you can do what you can through good planning. But we assumed along that area. And in the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan, it was very controversial when we went into it because it was such a long planning horizon of 50 years to start assigning specific densities and zones to pieces of property. So we didn't do that, but what we did do is we assumed that the majority of that area would be residential, and we colored those areas darker, knowing that you would have higher densities along that corridor. So
okay, and that makes sense to me. That leads me to my next question. What did Washington County think of the traffic study, particularly when they're not sure what they're going to do with Elwert and Edie? And it doesn't sound like it was a funded project at the time you guys did this study, so it probably wasn't factored in as one of your variables. Is that right?
No, the Edie, The question about Edie Elbert?
Yes.
Yes, so they did give us the go-ahead to assume a roundabout.
Okay.
And that it would be reasonably likely funded.
Oh, okay.
And
All
so
right.
that was
Oh.
in there, but they gave a caveat. It could be a traffic signal. There's a lot of environmental issues
Yeah.
at that location. And so they said, go ahead and assume roundabout. It could be a signal. We really don't know what that's going to look like because whatever we recommend, we're going to go out to the public and get feedback as well. So they said, something's going to happen there and it will be funded, but we don't know what that's going to be.
Okay. And so you did add that.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Can I add to that? I mean, because it was really telling at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission kept the record open to do their considerations later because we did get some letters from ODOT somewhat suggesting that they weren't supportive of the methodology. And Aaron Wardell, who's the principal planner at the county, I think stated it best for the Planning Commission, and I think it's important that everybody hear this, that you could ask 100 different traffic engineers about the best methodology to use. And, you know, you have 4 or 5 traffic engineers trying to come up with a consensus on a methodology. And although they thought that, yeah, it was a good methodology, it was a methodology that would work, they didn't necessarily support the methodology at the time in front of the Planning Commission. And Commissioner Simpson asked the question, well, what does that mean? And I think that opened her eyes because it's like, yeah, the methodology is sound. It's just not, you know, there's other ways that we would have skinned this cat. But they didn't come up with any specifics on how they would rather have skinned the cat. They just made that blanket statement, which was frustrating to us. But we're working through that now on the TIA, and hopefully we won't have those types of comments going forward.
Well, it sounds like the DKS used some numbers that were peculiar to Sherwood for number of trips being generated, for parents dropping off their students. So that's a good thing. That was tailored for what Sherwood does. So, okay.
It was a shift.
Mm.
Shift of students.
Oh, okay. From one end of the highway to, okay. All right, thank you.
Any other, please.
So with that, what you just explained, the 2-lane roundabout is at this point a suggestion by DKS?
Yes, the single lane roundabout was funded by Washington County, and what the school district is proposing is to make it a double lane roundabout to add additional capacity.
And so when that's still a conversation to be had, that will be what?
No,
that will be what happens.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
and Washington County has approved that.
I see a double lane being a disaster if you ever drive through the Walmart one. Okay.
Not everybody has that problem.
I do not have a problem.
I live on that road.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem.
Yeah. Moving right along, does anybody have any further comments to these 3 presenters? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, Mayor, this would be the time that you would open the public hearing to anybody, and then.
Well, I have 4 others already.
No, that's so those 4. So basically you're going to open the public hearing, but based on the time, they've got about 30 seconds for rebuttal after you've heard from. I'm not quite sure whether or not they're going to need that, but I just wanted to point that out. So the applicant has spoken. You'll take public testimony from the people that have signed up to speak, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to rebut any additional.
So we're not hearing from these 5 right now.
Mayor, on the sheets that you have there, you've heard from Karina Ruiz.
Yes.
You've heard from
Scott and Brad.
You've heard from Brad Kilby.
Yes.
So push those aside and then ask for the comments from the others.
That's what I was prepared to do. Sue Hecker?
How's that? I don't want to
Better.
be too loud.
Great.
Okay, so my name is Sue Hecker, and I think I have to say where I live. It's 15019 Southwest Ginkgo Court in Sherwood. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, for being the liaison to the school board that I'm part of, and I appreciate being here tonight. Obviously, I just stated my name's Sue Hecker. I've lived in Sherwood for 21 years. I'm a parent of 2 graduates of Sherwood High students and one that still attends the high school. And I serve on the board of directors for the district and just finished my 10th year. I feel like this is going to be information that you already know, but I'm just going to say it for the record, so please bear with me and I'll try and move quickly. But over the past 22 years, Sherwood has grown, and so has the district, obviously. Some years, growth reached double digits as families moved to Sherwood and enrolled their children in school. Throughout this time, the community supported education, passing much-needed bonds for new schools. The Sherwood community supported and still supports education in an unprecedented manner. I'm not sure about this stat, if I'm something to be proud of, but we lead the state in bond indebtedness and have for many years. We're back at number 1. But that's how our community supports schools, and I think that's, we've talked a lot about that, and it's important to remember. Recent growth slowed a little bit. It seemed to be a little bit more manageable. However, the student population has climbed, and it's climbed to the point of overcrowding once again. And at that point, obviously when we realized that things were crowded, that was really around kind of when we were doing the boundaries, and we discovered, oh my goodness, we really don't have room or the capacity that we thought we did. So those conversations began, and they took many forms. So that included bond design committees, steering committees, design committees, surveys to the community, demographic studies, key communicator feedback, student groups, community forums, a neighborhood meeting, and even school board meetings. So it was a rather thorough and robust conversation, and with a lot of great input. Participants included a wide variety of folks too: students, parents, teachers, community leaders, business leaders, stakeholders, so a broad group. And what we really discovered in those conversations was something different in Sherwood. We'd always kind of added a new elementary and remodeled everything else, and that just didn't work anymore. And so out of the bond visioning committee, the message from the community became very clear, and that was to craft a bond that meets the needs of current students and plan for the future, and to do it right and do it on time and on budget. As you know, that bond was passed by voters over a year ago. And so that's kind of the background that you probably all already know, sorry. But I want to talk a little bit about is what we're facing today. And we talk about overcrowding. It's this big word in terms of numbers, but I want to point out that these aren't numbers, these are human beings. These are students. And there are points that happen in the moments of these students and human beings that can't be repeated. So if there's no room for parents to attend a child's performance or see them receive an award, the moment's gone, the opportunity's lost, and that's overcrowding. There are no do-overs in education, and every year that a student sits on a dirty floor to eat lunch or have a small group time in a storage closet, the opportunity to provide something better for these students, an opportunity to learn without distraction, is gone, and that's overcrowding. Overcrowding exists in Sherwood schools today and will continue to moving forward. I also want to point out the district isn't a developer. We don't have the ability to raise revenue outside of taxes. The Sherwood School District is in the business of educating children and preparing them for a bright future. It's the responsibility of the district to use the precious gift of taxpayers' dollars wisely to benefit all students. I appreciate your time and continued support of kids in collaboration with the Sherwood School District, and humbly ask for your help to bring these projects in on time. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole Brutowski.
Good evening. I'm Nicole Brutowski, 22134 Southwest Hines Place here in Sherwood. My name is Nicole Brutowski. My husband and I moved here to Sherwood just over 8 years ago when our 2 boys were in kindergarten and 4th grade. I wanted to take an active role in my son's education, so I have volunteered in a number of positions across the district, including site council, PAC president at both the elementary and high school level now, and secretary at the middle school. We love the Sherwood School District, but just in the time that we've lived here, we've witnessed staggering growth in the town, and that directly impacts our students. I had no idea how urgent the situation was, though, until my oldest son started his freshman year at the high school in the fall of 2015. At that point, enrollment was about 150 students over capacity. It's closer to 250 now, and we know that that number is just going to continue to grow. Overcrowding affects our students in many ways. Some are obvious, and some you don't really notice unless you're there. Our classrooms are packed with more students than they were designed for, which means students are squeezing in along the back walls and chairs and having to share desks. Textbook depositories and storage rooms are being used for classrooms, meaning these students are in poorly lit, very crowded areas. And we've added 2 portables in the last year just to house some of our core subjects like math, and this has also taken up valuable parking space. My son told me one trimester he actually had to walk all the way down the hall one direction, turn at the end of the hall, come all the way back up, because he couldn't just cross the hall. It was too crowded. Simply navigating the halls is too overwhelming for some of these kids because they're just too crowded. One parent asked me where my son ate lunch. I thought that's a silly question because kids eat in the cafeteria. But I learned that the commons are overflowing, and that's not much of an issue when it's nice outside and it's not raining. You guys know how beautiful our Oregon winters are here. So my son and his friends, they've eaten in the band hallway, on the stairs, even one trimester in a greenhouse. Didn't realize he had a greenhouse until he was eating in there. And I know that some teachers open their classrooms to allow students to come in, which shows how much our students care for our teachers and our staff care for our students, but it also takes away valuable collaboration and downtime for them. And because we have 2 lunch periods, students in the hallways during their lunch can actually impact learning for classrooms that are going on. I attended almost all of the input and visioning and community meetings that were mentioned before. And because of that and my involvement in different areas, I was asked to take the role as vice chair of the bond campaign committee last year, and I was happy to do so. In my role, both as a parent volunteer and with the bond campaign, I was able to talk to many people in different areas of the community. And the overwhelming sentiment, especially after the last boundary change, was that people are very relieved and thankful that the district is taking a proactive approach to try and get ahead of some of the growth with this new high school. If everything stays on track, my oldest son will have graduated, but my younger son and most of his friends will be starting the high school his sophomore year in the new building. And to delay this process even a month or 2 actually pushes the start date back by a year. And that means that these students may not start, they may lose a whole nother year, and that can, it means that they're just facing even more crowding in their hallways and their classrooms than what we're seeing today. As it's been mentioned, the Sherwood community has been very supportive of this long-term solution that benefits our students and our community, and so we need your help to keep this on track. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your support.
Thank you. Ken Bell.
Good evening, Mayor, Councilman. My name is Ken Bell. My address is 22285 Southwest Fisk Terrace. I'm also the high school principal. My 6th year at Sherwood High School and my 5th year as the principal. I also state my address because I live 1 block directly east of the proposed high school site. That wasn't the plan when I bought it. Being the high school principal, living directly across the street from your school wasn't exactly what I thought I was doing.
Not too likely.
But nonetheless, very excited about it. And I also have a 5th grade son in Sherwood schools at Easy Ridge. I'm here before you to talk to you a little bit about the urgency of the need to build a high school, and particularly on the timeline that we're looking at. Sherwood High School currently has 1,730 students, which is about 230 over the classroom capacity of our building, but significantly over the core facilities capacity of the building. So while we can house them in the classrooms up to 1,500, and as other people have talked about, we've converted storage closets and added 6 portable classrooms and those kinds of things. We still really struggle with putting students in our commons. Our gym can't hold our entire student body, and those kinds of things are really taxed. And I'm sure you've dealt with or heard about our parking situation, which is a significant challenge. The high school site is 45 acres. The current high school is the compilation of 5 different additions, and we have pretty much maximized the footprint on that site. Any addition would just reduce parking any further, which is why going to a new site was so important for us. We continue to grow by about 50 to 70 students per year on average, and that's what we're predicted to over the next couple of years as well. As we have converted those other sites to classrooms, for example, our textbook depository, we converted to a classroom 2 years ago. Now we have to close our media center the last week of the trimester and the first week of the following trimester in order to collect books and distribute them, which is a huge impact instructionally for our students. It's also a place where some students eat lunch, where they study, where they collaborate with their peers and those kind of things, so that has a big impact on us. Our cafeteria holds about 500 students. So as Ms. Bertosky talked about, during the poor weather, we really struggle to house our students at lunch. They end up all over our building. Our auditorium holds 262, so we can't even have one class in there because our smallest class is a little over 400 students. And so what I'm asking is for your support in continuing to move forward on the timeline in our hope that we can get into a facility where we can serve all of our students with what they deserve and to allow us to help them reach their dreams. And so I thank you for your support and for listening tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is Sharia Gower.
Hello, my name is Sharia Gar. I live at 20478 Southwest Lavender Terrace, and I'm a student who goes to Sherwood High School. I'm a junior, and having been in the school for multiple years, I know just how crowded our school is, and that's a lot. Our school and our population has been growing really quickly, and we know that it's not going to stop. And if we're going to need to keep the high school from being more congested, we're going to need a new one so it can function to the best extent and also provide us the opportunities that like students like me and the community at large needs to just grow and succeed and function well. So Nicole had talked earlier about students like not eating at the cafeteria at lunch, and that's been me for over the past year or so now. Ever since the beginning of my sophomore year, I've either eaten lunch either at the top of the staircase, in the hallways, or in a teacher's classroom. And not only is this like really scattering for our students, like for example, every new trimester when we get new schedules, I have to find my friends, not just in the cafeteria, but like around the entire school because there's so many places and like people are scattered everywhere. And also, this also distracts people, like when, for example, in their third period classrooms, because half the kids have lunch while the other half are in class. So like the kids in class, they can be distracted by like kids like just eat out in the halls like eating lunch, and this is also pretty bad for our security because it's a pain for the administration to try to like keep track of all of these kids. I'm also involved in engineering and the robotics club, so I spend a lot of my time in the day in the engineering room. And this room, like it's kind of like one of our like facilities, like our student facilities somewhat in the school, and it has some problems. One, it can get crowded really quickly. So for example, when I'm in the projects room trying to work on something and the teacher wants to do a demonstration for one of his other classes that's going on at the same time. That means that like if like 5 or 6 people are gathered in and like are crowding around, for example, the vinyl cutter or the laser cutter or the 3D printer, that space is just completely taken up and it gets congested so quickly. And I'm also in the robotics club, so I've spent a lot of time in the projects room because of that. And we had a problem earlier, and we still kind of have this problem, is one of our robots is a t-shirt cannon, and the base it has, the base that we use, that we've made, is, when it was first built, it couldn't fit through the door at all. And so we had to change it to where it could fit through the door, but every time we took it out of the projects room, we have to slant it to the side and make it diagonal in order for it to like even fit. And what I'm getting at here is that it's not just the population, but it's also our core facilities. For example, the Performing Arts Center. It's way too small. Our fall plays sell out really quickly because of it, and so this means that a lot of people don't really get the chance to see some of like the amazing plays that that the student body makes, and like they're really good. You should check them out if you haven't. Just plugging that in.
I'll do that.
And I see my time's running out, and there's a lot more stuff to talk about. Yeah.
You did a great job.
We hear you.
Perfect.
And we love the performing arts.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you so much.
Mayor,
Do we have any others?
if I may excuse, do you have a sheet for Liz Barrett? It might have been taken out of order, maybe?
Might have. Yes. Liz Barrett? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Liz Barrett. My address is 5420 Southwest Murray Boulevard. I'm a computer science teacher at the high school. I'm in my 13th year. So I'd like to give you a little bit of a perspective from the classroom sense as a teacher. My classroom was in the last remodel. I think it was set to have about 25 students in it. Just as everywhere else, we've had to expand. So I've lost closets. We've added tables. My students, there's currently 3 seats where you must be petite or you can't sit next to your neighbor. Most of my students have about the width of a keyboard, similar to the seating behind us. So definitely not conducive to learning. In other classrooms, we have students that are in chairs but no desks, as you've heard. When they go to work, they have to kind of buddy up. When you add in backpacks and other things that are brought to school, it's very challenging to get around those classrooms when you have the high number of students and a room that's not meant for that many. We have teachers on rolling carts because there is no permanent place for them. As you've heard, we have 6 portable classrooms. The gym is so crowded, as you've heard, that for the students to fit, they still must sit on the floor, and it leaves very little opportunity for parents or outside people to come. The lunchtime one is obviously a big one, especially as a teacher, because I want everyone to be successful, but I want the students to have a place to sit, but having a class during the other time is so challenging because you have the noise, and I want them to get their energy out so when they come back to class, they're ready to learn. But just providing them a space that would be reasonable to sit and have your lunch and converse. These are just a few of the reasons that it's critical we get a building as soon as possible. Thank you for taking it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sylvia, are there any
I have no others, Mayor.
others? We'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And council, any comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
the applicant does have 30 seconds remaining for rebuttal if they want to take it, just for the record. Okay. Just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
We tried. Council? Comments, please.
Just some questions, because a couple of our applicants, and I can just tell by all those that spoke, requested this be done in one night. And Josh, can you just explain how that's allowed with our charter? And
Yes, our charter typically requires that we have 2 separate hearings, separated by at least, I believe it's 6 days. But if the council desires to approve this in a single hearing, they can do so. We just have to read the ordinance by title twice, and the approval has to be unanimous.
Okay.
And we have to revise that ordinance based on the.
We have to approve the amended ordinance and then approve the.
Yes, regardless, there will be a motion to amend the ordinance, which then has to be approved, and then a motion to approve the ordinance as amended, which would also need to be approved. So 2 separate motions.
Okay. And so if we're going to consider doing this in one night, then I guess my question is, and just to verify for the public that's watching, this went through Planning Commission 2 nights, 2 hearings. And during that process,
Sorry,
2 nights, 1 hearing. I believe that they closed the public hearing at the end of the first meeting and then just deliberated, so there wasn't
Okay,
a second
so
opportunity.
one public hearing and opportunity for the public to comment. And both meetings, letters were sent to surrounding property owners. Did I read that right?
We
Or one?
do the notice, so when we noticed for the first meeting with the Planning Commission, we also noticed sort of tentatively
Okay.
this meeting, and it goes out to the property owners within 1,000 feet, as well as notice in the paper and posting notice around town and on the website.
Our public has had ample opportunity then to hear about this. Okay.
And those meetings are also recorded, right? On YouTube, I think, the Planning Commission?
Yes.
Okay, so those are up as well, if anybody wants to see those.
We received a planning commission and council received just a couple letters from those that were against this. Were there many other comments at the planning commission meetings, if you know?
I'm going to let Matt come up just so, because he's the most familiar, but I believe other than the letters that you received in your packets, that's the only
That is correct. We
opposition.
didn't receive any other negative testimony at the Planning Commission, just people who were in support of it. Many of the same people that are here tonight. And we didn't receive any other letters besides that. And the letters that we did receive from Ms. Jennifer Bragger, she's representing one of the property owners who is on the high school site right now, and they're pursuing any options they can possibly pursue to slow down the process.
You might pass that on too.
Thank you.
We're looking at the revision wording of the ordinance that would incorporate what you've said. Do you have any discussion or comments on that?
Yes, so if that meets with council's approval, we would just need a motion from a councilor to amend the ordinance as recommended by staff, which would be seconded, and then you can vote on that, and then we can move forward to vote on the ordinance as amended.
Tim, can you hear that?
Tim, Councilor Rosner.
Yeah, sorry, you were on mute. Yes, I can hear you.
So I would make a motion to amend ordinance 2017-008.
Second.
Just to clarify, that's to amend the ordinance as recommended by staff.
Should I amend that?
Please.
Amendment.
So I will amend my motion to approve the amended ordinance
To amend the ordinance
to amend the ordinance
as recommended by staff.
as recommended by staff, ordinance 2017-008.
Perfect.
And I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Tim, can you hear that?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sylvia?
At this point, Mayor, it would just be all in favor of that motion?
All in favor of the motion?
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. We have a new amended revised ordinance 2017-008, approving the Sherwood High School concept plan, amendments to the comprehensive plan text, amendments to the comprehensive plan and zone map, and adoption of a Title 11 concept plan and establishing an effective date. Do we have a motion?
I was going to say, can I move to, is it caption and adopt? To recaption and adopt ordinance 2017-008, approving the Sherwood High School concept plan, amendments to the comprehensive plan text, amendments to the comprehensive plan and zone map, and adoption of Title 11 concept plan, establishing an effective date as amended by staff.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Mayor, I'm sorry, council, this is where I would do the actual roll call for the
Roll
ordinance.
call.
That's what I was trying to get you to do before.
We learn.
Do you want to, please do the roll call.
Ordinance 2017-008 approving the Sherwood High School concept plan, amendments to the comprehensive plan text, amendments to the comprehensive plan and zone map, and adoption of Title 11 concept plan and establishing an effective date. Counselor Rosner?
Aye.
Counselor Griffin?
Aye.
Counselor Browse?
Aye.
Counselor Young?
Aye.
Counselor Kuiper?
Aye.
Council President Garland?
Aye.
Mayor Weislovell?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion has carried. Congratulations to the school district and happy high school.
Keep doing great work.
Do we have to?
Oh, no, I just said
Yes.
So we're good?
We wish you all well. We're cheering for you. And that concludes item 7, public hearings and the results thereof. And the next item, city manager report.
Okay, Mayor and Council, just to make sure everyone's clear, this item won't be on your January 2nd meeting, so we're
Yes.
done with this step. So,
Good plan.
what will be on your January 2nd agenda, which we thought might have been tonight, and I think I'm glad it wasn't tonight because it's packed and we would have been here much longer, is the resolution to approve a potential contract with the YMCA. So all indications are that will be on your agenda on January 2nd. The goal is still to have the staff report and the resolution and the proposed contract available on our website next Tuesday, the day after Christmas. We're still working very hard in meeting that goal. So that should be on January 2nd. So I just wanted to make that clarification. The only other item that I want to talk about is actually hand off to Katie Henry, our finance director. She's going to introduce a new staff person that has joined our organization. For the newer counselors, we try to have new staff be introduced sometime relatively early in their tenure so that you have a face and a name and can meet our new staff. And I know Katie's very excited about this individual.
I am.
Welcome.
What she doesn't know is that there will now be a test on how to run a public hearing and when do we vote and when do the proper procedures for council meetings. No. So this is Leslie Dean. She is our newly hired accountant. She's been with us a week and a day, and she has already probably seen more Excel than she cares to see. But anyway, a little background on Leslie. She lives in Aurora. She is a CPA. Has 3 years of experience in public accounting. She worked doing audits of governmental and nonprofit organizations with the firm of Polly Rogers. You may know Roy Rogers. He highly recommends her. She worked with him in his firm. And so has put together financial statements, has reviewed CAFRs and documents, and we're really excited to have some of that experience on the finance team. That's been lacking. It was exciting to me. We just today got done with the audit. And the auditor sent some papers over for review. I was completely swamped, handed them over to Leslie, and she promptly found a $90 error that the auditors had made. Oh. And I was like, okay, yes, day 2 of her being here. Good job. So anyway, just already showing the good work that she's doing. She also worked in accounting services and tax preparation with TD Consulting Group. And before starting her career in accounting, she was a Marine.
Oh.
Was a mechanic in the Marines, and then worked as a mechanic while going to school at night and to earn her CPA. So we know she's a hard worker. And again, we can already tell that. She's been a great addition to our team in just the week that she's been here. Great eye for detail, very meticulous. And she hasn't glazed over yet. I have her working on budget spreadsheets. And for those of you who have seen budget, that will make anyone glaze over. she's had to use the standing workstation, so I know she's having to keep herself awake, but no, we're really, really excited. So if you have any questions for her, she is here to.
Do you want to ask any questions?
I thought you meant glazed over because she came to one of the longest meetings that we've had in a while. Sorry about that. But welcome. I've worked with some great people from Polly Rogers, so that says a lot.
You bet. Glad to have you.
Glad to have you aboard. Thank you.
So, Mayor and Council, that's all I have tonight, unless you have questions for the few department heads that are here tonight.
Any questions? Okay, council announcements. Do you want to start? Tim, have you got one?
I have no comments tonight.
I have no comments tonight.
Just make one quick one from one of my liaison assignments, which is the Community Development Block Grant. We met last week, and it was kind of exciting. We're learning a new program called Zoom Grants. I guess in the past, they evaluated their grant applications a little bit manually and on spreadsheets. So now there's this new program called Zoom Grants. And it's a big learning curve for me to learn the program plus learning about the grants, which we will have staff presentations on those January 11th. And then on January 25th, we'll have all-day presentations from the grant applicants. And then we will evaluate the grants to see who going to be eligible for them. So it's kind of a new thing for me, and I'm looking forward to that. I enjoyed the boards and commissions dinner and hearing from all our boards and commissions on updates and what they're looking forward to next year. And the staff luncheon was really a lot of fun with all the crazy sweaters.
John?
No, I'm going to pass tonight.
I'll go last. Go ahead.
I just have one announcement. It's actually just a comment to either the city manager or Chief Growth or Public Works, but for putting up some stop yield signs in the middle of crossways for at least 2 crosswalks. And I wanted to thank someone, but Joe, who do I thank for that?
That was my idea.
Well, thank you.
But it was, I want to clarify for the public because we've had some accidents,
We have,
unfortunately, in some of those crosswalks over the last few months.
Yes.
Those signs were ordered months ago. Actually, they're not a direct response to what has happened recently.
Okay.
We identified and have heard from the community that we need to do more to kind of protect students walking to and from schools. So we ordered those signs back, I believe, in September. They arrived last month, but with leaf pickup and everything else, Public Works was busy doing other things, and we wanted to put those up during the school break. So we weren't out there during school days, interfering with traffic. So that's why they're going up this week. They're going up at, I think all of the schools are getting some additional
that's
signage.
Excellent.
Great.
Well, I know the community thanks you because, and they really do work, especially at night. It's very noticeable, and I slow down even though I usually go the speed limit at, I don't speed through school zones.
It's a good reminder.
I promise I don't.
But, you know,
Today only, but they really work. They absolutely work.
Chief Growth may add on to what I'm about to say. I mean, people just really need to slow down in town normally, but especially around our schools.
You bet.
Especially in the winter, we actually have had 3 different accidents where students have been hit in the crosswalk.
Yep.
So, you know, between people on their phones and rushing around to get to work and drop their kids off, we just need to slow down.
I agree.
And
so anyway,
you can
thank
put up
you
all
for
the
that.
signs you want, but if people don't change their driving habits, someone's going to get hurt seriously. So,
But those are great because they squeeze the traffic down into just 2 little signs. So it's effective. And the only other thing I wanted to say is I wanted to shout out to Kathy Shuckero. She's the Sherwood High School music choir instructor. She did a fantastic job. The choir program is absolutely growing at Sherwood High School, and I went to a concert on Monday night, and it was unbelievable in 4 years. She's been there 10 years, but I have really seen an incredible blossoming of the choral program in just the last 4 years. So I was very impressed. So happy holidays, everyone.
Renee?
Ditto on the shout out for the program, the from the high school and also VPA. In fact, I've seen 2 different programs recently with both of those groups singing to the Rotary Club, and they're phenomenal. And zoo grants, there might be a learning curve, but they're also really, really cool. It's a really neat way to do the grant system. I am a new liaison to the library advisory board, so I attended my first meeting last week. I think it was last week. And Adrian went over the results of a survey that was conducted, which was a really good result and really nice survey. I was pretty surprised to learn that 53% of what's going on in the library is technology related. And then one of the greatest needs as per the survey is our study rooms and meeting space. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. Did some other meetings as well, but I can save that for another time.
Okay, I'll wrap it up with a summary of the recent art walk. I think you know these happen like quarterly, and this one was another top performer. They had 12 official stops, Blue Plum with music, library snowflakes, symposium artists, people shopping in Old Town for Christmas, Smockville, no surprise, full. Gardner teams had Santa Claus and were providing free pictures, all kinds of photos with Santa and kids, so that worked out good. And some of you maybe have already been in Hodgepodge. Some of that comes from history, but Hodge is opening that up, and it's really cute and cool and sort of reaching back in history at the same time. And the high school caroling group was all the way through Old Town, and that was another great thing coming together. So art walks are super, and we're encouraged that they will be coming on a regular basis. No problems. Any other comments?
Mayor and Council, I want to remind
Please.
you, after you close the council meeting, you have a very brief,
Yes.
We anticipate brief urban renewal agency meeting, so.
Sounds good to me.
So.
With that, we will adjourn the council meeting. And some of you that have been here all day or all night, you're welcome to depart. Thanks for coming. I'm going to stand up for just a second.